to the Grassroots Series. I'm Dharmica Mistry from Cicada Innovations. I'm one of the program managers here, and today I'm going to be walking through some of the steps to take when you have an innovative idea. I've actually done this before. In my previous role, I was co-founder and chief scientist at BCal Diagnostics, where I spent 10 years developing and commercializing a blood test for breast cancer detection from a very small research idea. So I know what it takes to try and get something from a thought to a reality. So let's get started. Forming a successful business begins with having an idea. So some of you here today may have an idea or have a problem that you believe you have a solution for, or perhaps you want to generate an idea. And that really is the first step in the journey to being a founder or an entrepreneur, but it's what I call the easy part. It really is the easy part of the journey. And as with all good inventions, you then need to go on to validate, test, and understand where you fit into an ecosystem before you can actually have a full success. At Cicada Innovations, we've taken a lot of people on and through that journey. As a deep tech incubator, we have done this through incubation, commercialization, and acceleration programs like Cicada Grow Lab, who is delivering this series with Evoke Ag, and also through connections to our mentors. Our building is a really dynamic space. It actually has wet labs, offices, and even a rapid prototyping facility. So if you haven't been down, try and come and visit us. And I should add that our companies don't just work in agri-food tech. We have companies in here working in med tech, energy, and even robotics. So you have an idea. Most people think, awesome, I've got this idea, let's build it, let's sell it, everyone will love it, they'll buy it. But honestly, that really just is not the case, regardless of whatever sector you're in. Good ideas can come from anywhere, but anyone can have an idea. Ideas are aplenty. Ideas don't automatically translate into monetizable businesses. The best way to find a good idea is to actually have lots of them. And the real challenge isn't idea generation, but it's actually idea validation. So taking that idea or an invention or something like that and trying to create a commercially viable business around that. And a lot of people spend a lot of time and money putting everything into just the idea. So designing it and crafting it and forming it, and then they think about how to sell it and market it to their customers. But that's what I call working from the inside out. There are actually a lot of key questions that are often missed and should be explored before you embark on developing a business around your idea. For an idea to be successful, it needs to simultaneously address three types of risk: customer risk, market risk, and technical risk. And if you get these assumptions wrong, it's really easy to see how everything else in your business could possibly fall apart. For any product or service to be successful, these are the four core assumptions that must be true. The problem you are addressing is a meaningful one. The solution you have chosen fixes all or part of the problem. The market you have chosen wants to buy your product, and that the product delivers the solution effectively. These demonstrate and validate a sustainable business model, which is what you should be searching for. So where do you start? Well, to work from the outside in, it's useful to think about it the same way designers do with something called design thinking. So this is an iterative and practical process of developing new ideas or technologies, and it can really help you to define your problem space and create an even more innovative solution. So at a really super high level, the process for this follows 5 stages. Number 1, empathy, so understanding your customer's needs. Number 2, define, so state your customer's problems and needs. Number 3, ideate, so brainstorming unique solutions to the customer's problems that you've identified. Number 4, prototyping, so creating that actual solution physically, whatever that may be. And number 5, which is the most important, is to test this actual product and all your assumptions. So try them out yourself. So let's have a look at how to do this more practically. So here's what you should actually be thinking about when you have a new idea. Some of the questions you should be asking. Are there customers and markets looking for a solution that your idea can solve? Are these potential customers prepared to pay for your solution? Is your idea really innovative, new, or different? If so, how many people would be willing to buy it and get on board early versus something that they're already familiar with and using? Is there a big enough customer market for your idea on which to build a viable business? Who's out there? Who are your competition? Who will you be facing when you enter the market? And how big are these competitors? How many of them are there? Before you invest all that time, money, and effort, do your homework by checking there's a viable market wanting what you have to offer, that's willing to pay for it, and that you have a distinct competitive advantage. Because if your idea is not commercially viable, then honestly, it's just a hobby. And in other words, don't focus on problems you can solve with your solution. Instead, focus on problems your customers encounter when they're using existing alternatives. This subtle change in perspective is often the difference between inventing fake problems to justify your solution versus uncovering real problems worth solving. But tackling all of this at once can be quite overwhelming. So where do you start? You actually need to get some answers by running some learning experiments. So before we do that, let's take a step back and define a startup, a term that I'm sure you've all heard out there in the ecosystem. A startup is a temporary organization in search for a repeatable, scalable, and sustainable business model. In order to be this and do this, you need to be fast, agile, efficient, and focused. Traditional business plans are not relevant in the ideation stage. They take too much time and are usually created without any validated learning. So what is the actual first step here? The first step is to deconstruct your idea and get some thoughts down on paper into what we call key assumptions. So what you see here on the screen is a lean canvas. It's a one-page business template optimized for early stage ideas. This particular one was created by Ash Moroya, and it's adapted from Alice Osterwald's business model canvas, which you've probably all seen around and about on the internet. So it's optimized for lean startups, and it replaces those elaborate business plans by putting something onto a single page, which means it's really fast, really concise, and forces you to be concise, and it's a really effective way to see your idea more clearly. The idea is to spend around 30 minutes to get things onto paper about your possible solution. If you've got a team, you should definitely involve them and do it together as a practical exercise. Some people like to project this onto the wall and use sticky notes. You can also just use pen and paper and sit down with a copy each, whatever works for you. But essentially, the template covers the assumptions that you all have about the problem you're solving and with what solution you plan to use, the customer segments that you're solving for, your unique value proposition, which is the reason why people should buy from you, and what your competitive advantage is, I guess, the channels that you're going to use to reach the customers, how you're going to actually make some money, and what it costs you to get all this done. And then all of that is then encompassed by how you measure your performance as well. So it covers a lot of different sections of having a business and how you're going to execute this idea. Now, the point of this exercise isn't to fault your idea generation method. Remember, good ideas can come from anywhere, but how you act on your idea is a much greater determinant of success than the source of the idea itself. So do this with time and with honesty. It isn't a sell document. You're not going to need to spruce it up and show it to a whole bunch of people. You want to be listing 3 assumptions in each of the boxes. And to be honest, quite frankly, in the early days, if some of the boxes are empty, that is completely normal and totally okay. Your job is to start filling those out as you keep moving forward. So you have one sheet down, the first one, and the key is to test the assumptions you've written down. And then each time you test, you should change things from learnings until a winning business model emerges. And it may take, many, many iterations of this canvas and lots of changes in between. And it sounds like hard work because it is. It's going to be quite the process, but if you do it now, early on, it saves you a lot of time, energy, and money in the future. So how do you test and iterate these canvases? You want to take the assumptions in your lean canvas and validate each of them by talking to stakeholders that you've listed in your canvas face to face. This is about breaking down your own assumptions and adapting to the real need out there. Don't conceptualize, get out there, ask the hard questions, learn from the feedback, and generate data. I'm only going to talk about this quite briefly because there's a whole session coming up in another week where you're going to deep dive into this. So I think the biggest thing that I'd like you to take away is that even if you get people responding that, oh yeah, I think that problem's pretty good, I have that problem, the real why can't be sought out without a verbal conversation because it's often several layers deep. So you don't know what someone has tried so far or why it didn't work, but by asking why 5 times in a conversation, you can discover a lot and actually get to the root cause of a problem. It takes a lot of interviews to get there. You need to be speaking to multiple people from your groups of stakeholders, and It may sound like, oh, gee, one-on-one interviews, that seems so inefficient. But I can tell you from experience that they pack way more learning per unit than anything else you could be doing. And it's actually a very cost-effective way of acquiring very useful information. Going in with the view that you have the right solution for the problem is called Innovators Bias. The most amazing part is that people don't even realize that they're doing this. Therefore, how you speak to people is really, really important. You need to learn to suspend your own bias and really learn to listen. So that means asking really open-ended questions and not prompting or pushing the person you are interviewing towards the answers that you want to hear. And finally, more likes is not the same as buying your product. This process is very subjective, hence by speaking to more people will give you fairer outcomes. But because people are generally quite, polite and say things like, oh, that sounds great or really interesting, you need to follow up with those 5 whys to really assess how they feel. Your job is to eliminate the false positives and work on understanding how you can convert those who say no thanks. And you'll learn the most from the people that are the most critical of your technology. You don't want to take it personally. Instead, take it as feedback to fuel forward. You want to be honest and listen to the criticism and go ahead and break your hypotheses in order to, change things and find the true solution that meets the need. The process of validating each assumption is an iterative loop with 3 steps. 1, learn, so explore your assumptions. 2, build. So articulate your assumptions in a lean canvas or a plan or later on a prototype. And 3rd is to measure, so to validate your assumptions through experiments. Based on whether your experiments invalidate or validate your assumptions, you can then decide whether to go back and try again with a different set of assumptions, which is called pivoting. Or you can proceed with what you've learned and say that's the correct, validated answer and start on a next set of assumptions, which is to persevere. And we apply these to the 4 main assumptions I mentioned earlier on. So as a refresher, these were that the problem you are addressing is a meaningful one, that the solution you've chosen fixes all or part of the problem, that the market you have chosen wants to buy your product, and that the product you've created delivers the solution effectively. And I'm going to add the most important part here, which is that this whole process can mean changing teams, markets, customers, products, names, and visions. And that is totally okay because that's what you're working for. Building a sustainable business. The first step is to validate the problem. So you want to know if this is a meaningful problem to address. You want to ask about the problem. What's the problem? Who has the problem? How does it impact people's lives? How do people try to address the problem now? And you build a lean canvas. You write a vision, you articulate your customer segments, and you do something called a journey map. So journey maps, as you can see on the screen at the bottom there, are visual representation of the customer's journey. So what experiences they go through to get to your solution. And you're going to hear about these in another session, so I won't go much further than that. And finally, you measure by talking to customers and stakeholders and mapping out a customer's journey to truly identify them. Remember, you need to speak to lots of people because you need to find out if this is a real problem for a majority of your target market or just for a few people. And then also remember, you want to identify people that are skeptical and critical. So you get that data, you take it back, you rebuild your canvas, your vision, and your journey map. The second step is problem solution fit. So here you want to prove that your solution fixes all or part of the problem. So you want to learn how meaningful your solution is and how it truly solves for a customer's problem. Does it really work? Do people trust it enough to use it? Will people spend more time and effort to solve this problem? So here you can use something called the value proposition canvas to map this out. So it's a tool which can help ensure that the product or service that you're developing is positioned around what the customer actually values and needs. Value propositions are directly tied to the problem that you've discovered. So it's less about the features of the technology. You shouldn't be listing that. You should be talking about the gains a customer would receive from using your product. So that can be quantitative, such as time saved or additional revenue earned. But it can also be qualitative, so pain relieved or lifestyle benefits that your product gives the customer. Measuring at this point in time means researching what is out there, so your competition, both commercially and in the literature, and mapping out your solution against the customer's pains and understanding what they gain from your solution. Coupled with your customer interviews, this is a really strong set of data that can help carve out your competitive advantage. The third step is product market fit. So here you're assuming that your business model is sustainable and that the market you've chosen wants to buy your product. You want to learn about how many people have this problem, whether they trust your product to solve their problem, will they exchange value or money for it, and whether you can continue delivering the solution. So this is where you need to come and build out. So the building piece is market analysis. So why does market size matter so much? Well, you need to validate that you've found a product, a market that wants it, a market that's big enough. If that market is really small, cheap, or shrinking, you still don't have much of a company. So don't just go and find a market, find a really great market, a really big market. Market analysis involves crunching numbers around the opportunity and understanding how much people will pay for your solution. So what makes a good market? A good market is a large number of potential users, high growth in those users, and ease of user acquisition. So integration is a big piece here, people being able to acquire what you've got. So tools to measure. You have the TAM, SAM, SOM, which is a template that allows you to break down your market share realistically. First, you calculate your TAM, which is your total addressable market. So this is the total possible demand for your technology if you had 100% market share. When you're trying to understand your own total addressable market, you need to think of how you define your company and where you believe it can go. So really big picture stuff. Next, you slice the pie down and calculate your SAM, so service addressable market. So this is a segment of your TAM that you can actually reach. So think geographic, demographic. Finally, you narrow it down to service obtainable market, your SOM, which is the realistic market share with the current business model as it is. So how much of the market in your location can you realistically reach? To evaluate this, you need to have both a strong understanding of your local market, but also deep knowledge of your own company and what it can truly deliver. You can also keep measuring in this section by doing more interviews around pricing and understanding what people are willing to pay for your solution, or alternatively, or in hand actually, would be better, getting people to pre-order, so locking people in and seeing what sort of traction you can get. That's very powerful data as well. Finally, the solution product fit. This assumption is validating that your product delivers the solution effectively. You want to learn if your product is meaningfully better than what people do now. Is your product usable enough to deliver this solution? Does your product enable the necessary behavior change? This is when you build your minimal viable product, the MVP. So Eric Ries from Lean Startup Methodology defines the MVP as that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about a customer with the least amount of effort. What he's saying is that an MVP should be the simplest form of your idea that you can actually sell as a product. Strip it down. Doesn't need to be the prettiest one on the market. It may be a product that only has, a few core features that make it work. The purpose of this product is to test demand. The market reaction defines whether you're inspired to expand your business or really stop and ditch it or adapt it. An MVP can help you define your core value proposition, reduce remakes later on, and therefore spend money more efficiently. You can measure in this section by taking your MVP to the stakeholders in the ecosystem and doing usability testing and getting their feedback. This will allow you to identify weaknesses really fast and improve them very quickly as well. So now what? You done? You ready to market? No, you need to do it all again. When you have your MVP ready, you need to present it to potential target customers, at least 50 of them, and see if they identify with the problem and solution the same way that you do. So you want to get back out there, gather more data and feedback, then head back to the drawing board, tweak it to suit what the market has said, and go back out and test it. And importantly, don't lose momentum. Once you have these people listening and giving their feedback, you want to keep them engaged. So keep adapting your lean canvas and your MVP, go back to them and keep asking for their critiques. All the interviews and data that you've gathered won't mean anything if you don't act on the interest while it's hot and get a good measure of response, because you don't know when you'll have their attention again. The bottom line is you should be doing this customer discovery and customer validation phase over and over and not be afraid to change your technology. Do this until you have a proven business model and adopt that experimentation mindset. Many businesses are really afraid to fail and therefore they don't even put themselves in that position to begin with. And what that means is you're actually avoiding adopting new ideas and not properly validating an idea before launching it to the market. So by being flexible and agile and having that experimentation mindset, you'll be more willing to make mistakes and be less afraid of them. And therefore you're going to test a lot more ideas. So fail fast, iterate quickly, learn what works and what doesn't, and keep going. Businesses often skip this step because they're in a rush to launch their product, but it's actually crucial that you do this upfront and early because you may fail to identify your customers correctly, or even worse, build a really ineffective solution. If we think about commercialization and building a business, there are 5 key principles. So 1 is identifying an unmet need. 2 is demonstrating a proof of concept. 3 is protecting the asset through IP. 4 is establishing strategic partners, so distribution or how to get it to market. And then finally, 5 is marketing and approvals and creating that impact that you want with that product. So the additional steps that are often missed are number 1, protecting. So protecting your product via IP. And the second is understanding the market. So this is why customer discovery and validation are so important to do upfront and early. Taking an idea from bench to reality is a really long journey. Discovery data is just the start of that. So as I said earlier, it's the easy part. You then need to define, develop, and market. And this involves testing, validation, reproducibility studies, product development, revalidation, and then finally conformity and marketing. What I'm trying to say here is that it's a really lengthy process and takes a lot of drive and determination. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So prepare for the long haul, build stamina and resilience by working smart and not cutting corners. You are never done. My bottom line is that even after repeating test and validation processes over and over, you need to keep that mindset and practice over time, because assumptions that are valid today might be invalid tomorrow, and you really need to keep your competitive advantage. You need to be able to iterate when things are not working. So that iterative loop continues long after you launch into market. So keep the mindset, don't get complacent, and incorporate these behaviors into your day-to-day practice as well as your team's day-to-day practice. And finally, I'll reiterate that your product's value must satisfy the needs of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs to accept your product. People must value your product enough to be willing to pay for it, and your business model and pricing must fit your ecosystem. So it has to be enough to generate sales and revenue to sustain your business. Thank you. Next up, we'll be hearing from Cicada Innovations CEO, Sally-Ann Williams, who will be chatting to 2 incredible founders that have been there and done that, so you can get an actual real-world example of what steps to take when you're bringing an innovative idea to commercial reality. Thanks a lot.
Hi everybody, my name's Sally-Ann Williams and I'm the CEO of Cicada Innovations. I'm really excited to have a conversation today with 2 founders. We really believe that if you're on to a big idea, if you're wanting to solve a big problem, some of the best ways to learn about how to do that and how to get kick-started on your entrepreneurial journey is to actually learn from other founders and what it is that they did to kind of recognize and realize that their idea was a good one, that it was sound, that was going to solve a problem in the market that people were facing, and how they went on the long and sometimes challenging journey to actually bring that product and that idea to life. So I hope you're going to enjoy this and get a lot out of it. It's a really exciting thing to kind of really get under the hood and unpack what it is that a founder has done in those very early stages of building their business. So first up, we're going to be talking to Dale Schilling. Dale is the CEO of Hillridge Technologies, and he recently came through our Grow Lab Accelerator program. He's spent a lot of the time in the field talking to farmers, talking to people that really, are interested in the product and the service he's built. But he actually spent a lot of time thinking about this before he even made the leap to start his own business. He has a connection to the problem, both from a deep understanding of finance and understanding the problems that face, but a really personal connection as well, about the challenges and the realities of farming and what that means in Australia. So let's kick off and welcome Dale to this conversation and get to hear how he actually started Hillridge, what he did to get it going, and where they are now. Welcome, Dale.
Thanks, Sally-Ann. Really nice to be here today.
Dale, I'm super excited to hear about the problem that you're solving and what it is that Hillridge does. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us about how you recognised the problem, what your personal connection is to it, and what it is that you're solving for.
So I started Hillridge Technology 2.5 years ago. And I'd spent my whole career working in natural resources, first managing oil and gas projects and then, as a management consultant, working for large mining companies. And I could see how large corporations like that manage risks. But my personal background is from farming. So both my mum's and my dad's side are farmers going back many generations. In fact, my grandpa owned the original Hillridge. It was a ram stud. My dad went to my grandpa to buy a ram, met my mum, and that's how me and my brothers were born. So I've got that personal connection to agriculture. And one thing that's frustrated me over the many years is seeing how much the weather affects farmers and yet what few tools those farmers have. I could see through my career, I could see how large corporations manage weather risks. It's through weather derivatives, which have been around since the 90s. And yet small and medium-sized businesses, which describes most farmers, like my dad, just don't have that same sort of access, and it really hurts them. So my dad managed his property for many decades, but in the end, his health failed and he ended up selling the family farm at the height of the millennium drought. Now, like all things, there are so many factors when it comes to natural disasters like that. It wasn't the drought alone that caused him to make that decision to retire, but it certainly played a huge influence. And the fact that he had no financial tools available to him to help manage or smooth out those risks really stuck with me.
So Dale, that's a really personal connection to the problem space. And I really just want to thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes we think of problems as something abstract, but this is something that's deeply affected your family and the family business. That's one business and one family. How did you go about, what was the journey to validate that, more farmers were facing this problem and it was something that was beyond maybe just even the region that you're in? How did you validate that this is actually a problem that could build a business, that you could build a business on and a solution on that would, be of a size and a scale that it would be successful? What did you do to validate that?
Yeah, so when I was still working for my former company, I hit on this idea of weather insurance. I was doing some training for blockchain, and one of the use cases the trainer talked about was weather insurance. And it really got me thinking about my dad and how, he could have really used some weather insurance. And so that's what got me started. And so I started out with some questions. Why didn't Dad buy this weather insurance if it was available? Or if it wasn't available, why wasn't it available? And so I asked people that worked in the industry, people that worked for large grain trading companies and the like, around why they saw this gap. And from what they were telling me, it seems that there's this big gap in the market, but because we're talking about small and medium-sized businesses, it's just too hard a problem, for large corporations to manage. So it's been a problem that's been unaddressed for a really long time. And so that's when I left my company, my former job. I tend to only be able to focus on one thing at a time. And so I figured I'm going to give myself 3 months, talk to as many farmers as I can and, see what the problem is. And so that's what we did. It took us a while to figure out how to get to talk to farmers. So we started off, trying to use social media. And after a month, we'd managed to get survey responses from only 25 farmers, and things were just not looking well. And that's when we came across these national field days. So we went to Orange. We set up a booth at the Orange National Field Days for 3 days, and we ended up having these deep dive interviews with 81 farmers. People telling really personal stories, and time again, it was stories like my dad's that they were talking about. And so that's what got us started. And I found that every 3 months we give ourselves another challenge, another hypothesis that we need to validate. And so far, we've hit on an approach that seems to work.
So that's super interesting that you've had a hypothesis and you've validated and you're continuing to do that. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more about where the technology is now and what Hillridge actually does and how you're solving that problem. Because I think that's really, really interesting, right? You're staying close to your customers, you're staying close to the market needs, you're trying to really meet that demand, not your perceived demand. But what is it that Hillridge is doing, and what is it, the product that you've brought to market to solve this, and how is that being received? Like, how do you validate that it's actually working?
Yeah, so the first set of hypotheses were around the farmers. And so after that 3 months, we'd spoken, by the end of the year, we'd spoken with over 200 farmers, and over half of them were telling us, yes, this is a big problem and we would really love some tool to be able to manage this. And so we shifted our focus then away from farmers and onto the insurance companies. So, is the reason there's a gap in the market because insurance companies just aren't willing to take on that additional risk? And what we found was that, local insurers, their business model, because it's focused in Australia, they could only accumulate so many risks. And so they offer bushfire insurance and hail insurance to broadacre crop farmers, but they aren't able to expand that risk profile. But the story was different when we approached overseas underwriters. To them, Australian agriculture is an offset to the weather risks that are already in their portfolio. And so for them, this was about diversifying and expanding their portfolio, whereas in Australia, expanding the portfolio just means accumulating more risks. And so that was the real insight, was that it was the local insurers. We weren't going to get very far with them at all. But with global insurers, they had a real interest, but of course they lacked access to the farmers. And so that's the role that Hillridge plays, is as a bridge between farmers, aggregating demand and correctly pricing risks, and then offering that to overseas underwriters who are then able to incorporate that into their portfolio. So we really act as a platform that has two sets of customers, the farmers on the one hand, and then the insurers on the other.
That's something so interesting that just came out of that conversation then, because my assumption was that, the farmers were your customers and that was where you needed to do all the validation. But from what you've just said, it's actually the other side as well, and with insurance companies. So how did you do that? How did you kind of, find the pathway to actually validate that internationally as well?
Yeah, so we started with a list of a dozen or so insurers, and methodically went to each one to see, first of all, was there an appetite from their perspective, to take on these type of risks? How would they go about that? So would they do it via derivatives, or would they do it via insurance? How does the regulatory framework work? And so on. And so we whittled it down to about 5 insurers that had the risk appetite and were interested in pursuing talks further. And then, we continued to work with them, and we ended up with 2 insurers that were both happy to take on that risk and were willing to price it in a way that seemed quite reasonable and appropriate. So they're the 2 that we're continuing to work with today. But it's really a set of conversations that you have over a long period of time, really understanding how the insurers think about risks, how they think about accumulations, how they think about pricing, how they think about risk management. And tailoring your product so it's suitable for them. So what I found is that we have to develop the solution so it's 95% ready, present that to the insurers, and then modify it based on their particular needs, rather than going to them with an idea and then saying, hey, how about this? So, it's really been a long exercise. We first approached the insurers back in February or March last year. We finally signed a deal with one of them about 18 months later, and we're just about to sign a second deal with a second insurer, 6 months after that. So these things, particularly when you're talking with large corporations, these things take a long time to come through.
So it's really interesting about the length of time and that's taken. There's 2 things that I want to unpack a little bit further there, because I think they're really important learnings in here. One is that length of time and that persistence. And, if you could tell us a little bit about, how you've kind of managed that, and is that different to your expectations of the time that would take?
Yeah, it certainly is. When we first got started, being quite naive, and this is my first startup, I thought we could launch a product within 6 months. Realistically, I think 12 months would have been cutting it fine, but of course then COVID hit, and because we're talking to large corporate, large international insurers who are heavily affected by the pandemic, that put things that threw a real spanner in the works. And so probably delayed our product launch by another 3-4 months. And it also spooked our investors too. So, we're sort of managing that kind of collateral, the ups and downs, and, these grenades that are thrown in from time to time. We've had to change our go-to-market approach a couple of times over that 18 months, based on what we're finding through these conversations. But we've finally landed on a business model that seems to work. It fits into the regulatory framework well. And the farmers and the brokers who are selling to the farmers love the technology because it really gives them some strong insights into how the weather is affecting their farms.
That's amazing, and congratulations for getting where you've gotten to today. I know there's more ahead. I want to switch on to the second thing that I pulled out of your story, that I took away from your story a little bit then, which was around capability and understanding both sides. You talked about the insurance market and used a set of language and terms that I think most people, if you're not familiar with insurance, may not even know. And yet you've also talked about farming in a way that farmers know. What is it that you think, that you bring to the table as a founder? What are the skill sets? Why are you the right person to be solving this problem? Because I'm hearing I'm hearing two Dales almost in this story.
Yeah, well, I think there may even be 3 or 4 because you've got the agronomic side of things. Now, of course, being a farmer's son doesn't make me an expert in farming by any means. And so one of our first hires was of a world-class agrometeorologist. So she does crop modelling for a living and has done for over 30 years. So we brought her on as an advisor, and now she works for us part-time as our chief agronomist. The second is on actuarial modelling. So how do insurers think about the world? Now, again, my background was in natural resources. I've used derivatives. I use derivatives and insurance as a tool, but I wasn't issuing insurance, so I don't come from that kind of background. And so we hired a technical consulting firm, again on an advisory basis, to really help us bridge that gap. And then one thing that became really clear halfway through the year was I do not have a technical background whatsoever. And so I'd been working by myself as a solo founder up until that point for about 12 months. And that's when I met my co-founder, DK. Now, he does have a technical background. He's worked in the finance industry. And so he could immediately see things that I wasn't seeing. And so having that diversity on your team, people from all kinds of different backgrounds that contribute towards the solution is just so important. But then you need someone that's coordinating it all. And what I found is that no one, in the organisation or any of your corporate partners will care about this problem as much as the founder. And that's the driving, force through all of this. And so anytime I'm really struggling, I think back to, well, what would Dad have wanted me to do? And, how can I help the most farmers, that I can? And that's really what's driving me through all of this and gets you through those ups and downs of startup life.
I think you've said some really valuable things to our audience of people who are going to be watching this and tuning in, that they might want to do that on repeat. Because it is really challenging to be a founder, and keeping true to the reason, to the why, what's your North Star for doing this is really critical. And then building those capabilities around you and recognizing what you bring to the table, but where you have maybe gaps, and bring other people to the table. You talked about being in a corporate. What was the challenge? What was some of the biggest challenges or some of the biggest learnings of moving from a corporate environment to a startup environment? Because I think they're very different worlds. There's great skill sets you bring into it, but what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I'd always wanted to do a startup. I just didn't have the right idea. So I'd saved up a bit of money, and then when I hit on this idea, that's when I decided to take the leap. But the big difference, I think, with working with corporates is they work either really fast or really slow. So they work slow when they're dealing with day-to-day stuff. They've got multiple competing priorities. And so your project is probably number 10 on their list of priorities, if even that. And so things will progress at a certain pace. But for big corporations, they also have access to tremendous resources. And so as a management consultant, typically you're brought in to tackle the most challenging problems. It's probably on the CEO's top 5, agenda. And so that project is going to be allocated the right resources and get things done really quickly. And so the space that most startups play, I think, is more in that former set where it's really important to you as the startup founder, but it's it's not the top priority for the big corporations that you're dealing with. And so I think having that insight really helps. As we are dealing with corporations, I really treated them like I would as a management consulting client. But the thing I've struggled with most as a founder, and I think most founders will recognise this, is just the lack of resources. You've got to do everything, and if you don't do that thing, it just doesn't get done. And so half the job is marshalling the resources as well as getting the job done. Whereas working in a big corporation, marshalling resources is often a moot point, or you've got those resources to start with.
It's a really good point. And I think the other learning about being a founder or a CEO is often too, it's the lonely thing. You've got to marshal the resources, but you've also got to lead your team. Any insights there that you want to share with us?
Oh, I think emotionally, it's so much easier having a co-founder, someone that you can share problems with, share the highlights, but also, just act as a sounding board. Having mentors and advisors is also great, but they're never as invested in your business as you are. And so, I think having a great co-founder has made a huge difference. But of course, you want to choose the right co-founder. And having technical abilities that complement one another is really important. But I think the most important factor is trust. Do you trust one another? That when things are going, when times are tough, or you're hit with a really amazing challenge, one of you has made a huge mistake, that you don't turn on one another, and you actually work with one another to figure out how to get around a problem or how to grow the business.
Yeah, that's a really great insight. Thank you for sharing it. I want to touch a little bit on the journey that you've been on. Founding a business is hard. It's long. There are lots of obstacles. Are there any obstacles that you've faced along the way that you could sort of share with us a little bit about, what the obstacle was, and how did you either go around it and navigate around it, or just blow through it and remove it from your pathway?
So I think the biggest challenge we faced was about 12 months ago, when we discovered that the go-to-market strategy that we'd always assumed that we would be the ones selling this insurance to farmers. We had the closest emotional connection to the farmers and really understood their psychology and the things they care about. And so we really wanted to be front and center selling to farmers. But it turned out, for regulatory reasons, that wasn't going to be possible. And so we've kind of had to reinvent Hillridge Technology as a software company. We're offering software as a service to insurers who are then using our technology to then sell this kind of weather insurance to farmers. And so that's required a bit of a shift in mindset. It means we've had to change who's in our organisation. And it also means, our role around educating those insurers and the brokers around what are the sorts of things that farmers care about has become even more important. And so, we've had to shift from a sales and marketing strategy to more of a broker engagement strategy, as well as on the technical side. And then the other thing that I'm not sure we've even nailed yet, but we've is on our radar, is how do we maintain that connection with our ultimate customers? Because at the moment, our customer is the insurance company, but the ultimate customer, this is a B2B2C play. And so how do we maintain that really strong connection with the farmers, so that, if something's going wrong, or we're missing it, if there's an opportunity out there, or, farmers love the product, but they'd love this other feature. How can we, keep those feedback loops in place so that we're still really close to that ultimate customer? And that's going to be our biggest challenge, I think, going forward, and something we're really mindful of.
It's a really important one that you raise, is that being close to customer, and what does that look like and how do you do it? And I think, it's something we see often and we hear often from founders, is that customer discovery journey. Can you walk us through what how you're addressing that, or how you're thinking about that challenge now? Because customer discovery, you talked a little bit about what it was in the very first instance, and you talked about that you have multiple checkpoints, but how do you think about customer discovery as not a thing that you do once, but something that you do almost on a daily or a weekly, on a consistent basis? What is it that you do to build that into the organisation?
Yeah, so we interviewed over 400 farmers, and have maintained strong links with about half of them. So we've maintained those email lists. We talk to them periodically on the phone. If we've got a new product design, we'll often test it with a group of handpicked beta testers from around the country. And so we're really quite mindful that, even if we are one or two steps removed, on that commercial chain, but we still have that direct link to, a handful of farmers that are representative of who our target customers are going to be. So that's something we're really mindful of. And, we've invested a lot in those relationships, and we sure don't want to give them up.
I think it's fantastic, and it's such a critical thing. So last question, and just a quick one for a teaser for everyone there. What's in 1 minute, what's next for Hillridge in 2021?
So for 2021 is going to be a massive year for Hillridge. First, we're going to launch a simulated yield product that approximates multi-peril crop insurance. So this is a first of its kind, insurance product that protects farmers across an entire season. And then the second piece is around international expansion. So we've got our eye on places like Argentina, Korea, Japan, China. The main question for us is which countries do we go after first and how? So that's some thinking that we'll be doing over the Christmas break, but big things are in store for us next year.
That's fantastic. I love the journey that you've been on and, where you're headed to, Dale. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your wisdom and your insights with us today. I'm super excited about what's next for you, and I'm sure that I won't be the only one watching to see.
Thanks so much, Sally Ann. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Olympia Yaga, CEO of Goterra. Olympia is got such a fantastic story and a fantastic journey. She's a farmer turned founder, and she's incredibly passionate about the problem she's solving. She's going to tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that she faced along the way, and also just how to get going. It's a critical step to take an idea and then actually turn it into something and go on that journey. So welcome, Olympia. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Hi, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, look, it's so exciting to always talk about a founder journey. And I actually want to start right from the beginning, because turning from a farmer to a founder, it's a giant leap. Whenever you start a business, it's a huge leap to kind of cross a chasm. What is it about the problem that you're trying to solve and you're passionate about it? What is it that kind of drove you to sort of start your business? And what is it that you're actually doing? What is the problem that you're trying to solve and change the world with?
Sure. I started by wanting to just farm sustainably, and that was driven by my really intense passion about working to mitigate climate change. But the longer that I looked at a farming problem, I realised that feed accounts for 70% of all production costs. It's also the number one part of farming that's challenged by external forces, logistics, commodity prices, world challenges. And so the further I looked into that dynamic, I realised that using insects to create feed wasn't necessarily going to solve my problem if I didn't change the way I farmed them. So recreating a conventional intensive farming system that relies on long transport logistics, difficulty accessing food waste, just recreated the existing challenges that intensive farmers face. And so we've designed automative robotic technology to farm insects in a modular way so that we can stack, rack, reconfigure and address challenges in situ. So be on site or as close to site as possible, which sort of turns the entire food waste management and farming system on its head. It's all driven by for me, the impending sense of challenge of the need to face the challenge of climate change, and that we have a very finite amount of time left to make meaningful change. And that's what drives us every day.
So you've actually just said an incredible amount in a very short period that I want to unpack a little bit, because this passion to, fight climate change and to turn the situation around, but then you actually mentioned like multiple challenges along the way and multiple problems. And, I come from a computer science background. That's quite a computational thinking thing to take sort of this big, complex, solve climate change. Here's the piece of the chain that I understand and I work in, and how do I break it down to the problems? How did you go about understanding the fullness of the complexity of the problem that you're trying to solve? Because you mentioned like several challenges that you had to have a solution for. What did that look like? How did you do that? How did you discover one part of the problem and then the next part of the problem and break down that complexity to actually think about each part of the solution?
Yeah, I think it came from sort of not knowing. Like, I didn't have the fortune of being an engineer. I'm not a business major. I didn't go to an accelerator or an incubator. And so I didn't have the knowledge that I could just focus on a part of the problem and say that I had a solution. And so each time I tried to build a business case with this solution of insects, and I found it kept hitting the same problems. And so I realized that whilst they were an opportunity, they on their own, they're not a solution unless the solution is different to what we already have. And so because I didn't know, I had my experience at Rabobank, which really made me feel like I didn't understand the startup world very well. And so that actually forced me to I felt like I had to just work harder to make my business case more attractive. But what it meant was that I was solving all of the problems, not just sort of a slide that said that I'd solved a problem. So insects are an opportunity for livestock feed for sure. And you can sort of put those two slides together and say it's over. But if you dug anywhere near deep into that business model, you realize that you're going to face the same challenges. And so ultimately, every time I turned around, the numbers just would not stack up if I just stopped there. And so it was like, okay, well, you actually have to solve all of this to create an answer using the opportunity. And so, yeah, I think it was just ignorance and maybe a bit of naivete, which is cool, like rock on.
I mean, I actually love that. For me, that's actually the most exciting part about this, is that you didn't have a roadmap or a perfect pathway to plan. You start with one part, and then when you've come up to the next part, what it sounds like is you've either gone, okay, I either have to go around this or through this or solve it and keep going. What is it about you that has given you that, I guess, that fortitude or that resilience to be able to do that? Because I think I see a lot of founders and that's something that they struggle with. They do put up that one slide and go, ta-da, we've solved the problem. Yeah. How have you kind of got that fortitude and what's that journey been like for you? Because it's not a short journey, right? How long have you been doing this?
So 2014, so 6 years, but, I've wanted to be farming my whole life. And I took a bit of a break in between. I think I've just been very lucky with the people that I've had the fortune to work with and the challenges that have come to me in my life. I have had the opportunity to be in a very unfortunate place. And when you have hit that kind of rock bottom, you realize just how much you have when you think you have nothing. And so my perspectives is very shifted from normal, I would say. Like I can always figure out something because of that experience. And so, and I think secondly, I spent 12 years with the United States Marine Corps, not in the Marine Corps, but working with the Marine Corps as part of their family readiness program. And obviously my husband was in the Marine Corps. And being associated with the Marines, they have a really interesting structure around leadership and solving problems. And that experience definitely helped me create structure around innovating and risk-taking so that you can do it purposefully instead of on the fly. I think those are the two things.
Could you say a little bit more about that? Because risk-taking purposefully versus on the fly, I think that's a really important insight. And hearing from you that you draw from the depth of your experience, from your whole life experience, and you bring that into how you're building your business and thinking about it, how do you become purposeful about risk-taking?
It's accounting for what you're trying to achieve. And I think if you aren't, it's the P's, right? Piss poor planning leads to piss poor performance, which is a thing the Marines say a lot. And you're thinking about, okay, have I planned? And if I have, then if I've made a plan, then I can take risks because my known unknowns are documented and I'm ready for them. I know where I'm going. And so the risk taking around the direction that I'm taking can be mitigated because I know where, I can sort of plan. It's like, oh, I have to go left when I thought I'd go right. If I go left now, what does that mean? Can I still get where I was going? And so being planned in risk taking, I think, is key, and also being more dynamic in how you're addressing your problems and the risks that you're looking at. Sometimes we sort of look at the immediate and go, that's the problem. And I think being mindful that what you're seeing in front of you might not actually be the problem, it may be a symptom, and just doing more exploratory question and answers and digging a little deeper. I think as founders, we get so pushed and so stressed around the movement and the need to be kinetic and moving all the time that we forget that we have to do this well, not just fast. And we think that by going fast, we've done it well, or it can feel that way at least. And so, looking at what you've got in front of you and going, hang on a second, is this actually a problem? One we used to say all the time in the Series A was, is this a real issue, or is this something that money solves? And if money solves it, then it's not a problem. And we could just solve all of our concerns by just saying that out loud, because if it's a money thing, it's like, well, one day we will get the money. That's not our issue. So that's not really a problem to solve. The problems that we need to solve are ones that money won't solve, or time won't solve, or people won't solve. Those are real problems. So trying to figure that out and being more prepared, I think, was the key.
I think this is really incredibly insightful, and not something you talk about a lot. If you go through an accelerator program or something else, no one talks about this in the same way. So this is, and I can imagine myself sitting there as somebody who's got an idea in the back of my head and thinking about risk, and this is just incredibly valuable advice. You mentioned about you mentioned about discovering the problem. Can you talk me through how you kind of validated your idea and the customer discovery? And, is that ever done, or are you still doing it? And how do you keep validating that you're on track? Because I think we sometimes talk about it as a one-time thing. But I'd love to hear your journey, because you're a little further on now after 6 years.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think it's ever done, and I think you end up in a bit of a bathwater drinking exercise if you think the 400 cold calls to ask what the problem is the solution. You're like, oh, checkbox done. I think more than anything, the key to really understanding whether or not you're solving your clients' problems or just the problem you've determined they have is to actually have good relationships with them. And so, yes, cold call for sure, do those call arounds and ask people questions. I think that's important, but build on that interaction and be more purposeful in how you have discussions. I've always found that when I ask questions, my clients will answer them. And so take that opportunity to be vulnerable and ask the real questions, or even express the real problems, talk about, I don't think we can do that. Is that really an issue for you? And if it is, then it's like, how are you solving it today? What's the, they're not going to tell you how to do it because you're trying to do something different. But what they will tell you is what they don't like. They'll tell you what they're already having to manage. So, and I think that's really important as well. If I solve their problem, but I solve it in the same way that they're having to solve it today, I haven't solved anything. And so, using the opportunity to be super vulnerable with your clients and just going, I don't understand this. Is this what really happens? Is this how it works? What's really this problem? And talking about it in that way, rather than, hey, we've got this insert boxed solution here, and we think it's going to, change by Y to your bottom line. You're really not asking them if they have a problem that you can solve. You're asking them if they'd buy your stuff, and can they manage to convolute your story into their round peg, square hole situation? So being more honest and being more genuine and treating your customers as people that are part of your journey. And if people are part of your journey, then they're on the same road as you. So you would have discussions with people who are on the same road as you. You wouldn't sort of breeze by, sort of telling them that you'd meet them later. So yeah, just be more genuine, I think is huge.
I actually really love how you phrased that. I think it actually goes beyond just genuine attitude and spirit. It's actually about solving a common problem. Yeah. And while you might be solving climate change and they might be wanting to, you know, feed their animals for cheaper and in a better way, actually at the end of the day, there's a commonality about the solutions coming together, and it's a real partnership, which is so refreshing to hear a founder speak that way about a collaboration with customers. And it's almost like, you know, creating that co-creating in a sense, the solution that they want, so that they're ready there and saying, please give it to me now. Talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges that you've had in this journey. How do you know, is there any ones that you can share and sort of how you overcome them? Because, like, let's face it, the founder journey is long and sometimes lonely, and it's littered with challenges along the way. So is there any you can share with us and what you did to navigate around them?
Sure. We've had all of them. So the standard, you know, humans, hardware, software, and animals, they break, they die, they don't like you, and not always in that order. And I think, you know, we talk about that a lot here. Startups are hard to work for. They can feel unforgiving. They can feel fast and kind of disconnected. It can feel difficult to sit in that place for a really long time. And why would anyone really want to, aside from the bloody founders? Because, you know, they're the ones that seem, you know, have the most emotional connection to it. And unfortunately, there's so many Medium blogs and LinkedIn blogs about, like, you know, failure is learning and other trite sayings that we're supposed to feel good about, but really actually just create a burden around how we manage bad things happening, that you feel like you can't admit them because failure is learning. And if I grieve this, you know, failure in a HR way, or I'll grieve this tech failure, then I haven't shown my learning or whatever. So that can be that pressure to meet that standard or stereotype of how startups should behave can be really difficult for both the founder and the startups. And so I think what we've tried to really do, we haven't got it right. You know, there've been people that came that we loved that didn't work out. We've had tech that we thought was awesome and it was shit. Like all of these different things that you can try and figure out. But what we've tried to do is just say, like, our focus is the mission. Our focus is to do the mission. And what we're going to do is just turn up every day and do our best to achieve our mission. And not everyone can be in the boat on that mission forever. Some people are going to get off. They're not going to want to go the whole way. But their contribution was meaningful, whether it was good or bad. And that applies to the tech, applies to all the rest. So just sort of really seeing a long game rather than, and letting those things come and go in a compassionate way instead of like beating ourselves up about them. Sure, learn from them, but also grieve, like get angry, throw some stuff. Like, I think you've got to be more human rather than sort of this facade of, like, I don't know, Gary Vaynerchuk meets Elon Musk every day. The second part, you know, I think we went through some external challenges this year. So fires, floods, hail, and then COVID. And I think, again, when you add that extra pressure, when everybody's showing up every day and trying really hard, but the fires are making it impossible for flies to breed, or, you know, our roofs are busted in from flood. I think always just remembering that the pressure that causes the fear is the fact that you care. And if you can just try and somehow find your way to putting your finger on that knowing, I think you will still be scared. That's never going to go away, but you can know where that fear is coming from. You're afraid to fail, not because it'll be bad, but because you don't want to, and you want this to succeed. So I think everybody's just got to find a way to find language that helps them resolve these things, both individually and as a team, and then find ways for the company to hold that truth as part of itself, so that people can lean on that knowing, whether they've been there 5 minutes or 5 years, or, you know, you've got to create that as part of who you are as a company, and it can't rely on the fortitude of the founder or, you know, the goodwill person that always cheers you on. So making that part of who the company is has been valuable to us.
I think I've got 3 takeaways from what you just said there. One is the critical nature of team and people, and that some will be with you for a while, some will be with you for a long time, but really people are what makes the business. I think the second one around creating the type of culture that you want of a learning environment, and I heard you a lot in that time, you used the phrase we, not me or I, and I think that speaks volumes to you as a leader and as a team member alongside your team. And then I think the third thing I heard from that as well was just this authentic leadership and a level of authenticity about when it is hard. But that doesn't mean you're going to fall over. It's like, it's okay to fall over, but we'll get ourselves back up. So I think it's really incredible for people to think about that when they're thinking about doing a startup or an idea, because we so often talk about the glory moments and we talk about the raisings and those celebratory moments, but we also need to understand that between those moments there's incredible hard yards, and that's actually the bits that really count, because it's who makes the company and who makes the people in it. On the celebratory moments, tell us about some of the highlights. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way that maybe surprised you or just sparked incredible moments? Because I think there are things that you learn unexpectedly as a founder and building a business, and a lot of them are hard. But what are the moments that have been joyous and that have, really kind of blown you away, where you thought, oh, I would have never expected that?
Investors are humans. That was really weird. My investors are way more human than other people, and I'm not biased by any means, but I have such a great group of investors, but I did learn from them that they're human. And I think in the startup space, it never feels like a trade of equal value, because investors always feel like Mecca. We have to make the trip to them to beg them for the investment and their conversation, and you forget that you have something of value to them. And so my investors really taught me that it wasn't an unequal trade, that they needed me, and that they are human, and that I can engage with them as equals, and that doesn't. It never feels that way in your early investment rounds. By the time we got to Series A, it did, and I was able to say no to people who I just didn't like midway through meetings. And honestly, in the Series Seed, I didn't actually imagine that could ever be true. And so that's been a huge one. I've learned that people will go to unimaginable lengths to help you if you have done the same for them. And so one of the things that we've tried to do throughout the growth of the company is to give back to the community, give back to others, give back to students, bring them into what we do so that we could always have fresh set of eyes. But by giving like that, which we thought we were taking, because we're like, if we do this thing, then people will come and we'll hear their ideas. And so we felt like we were sort of taking, but we were giving people experiences, and they've gone out into the world and been like our greatest champions. And that's something that, we are, as a company, are super fortunate to have these just amazing advocates in the world that talk about us without any prompting. And I think that your customers want solutions that matter. And if you make that relationship right from the beginning, that they will actually do pretty much anything to help your vision come to light. We've experienced that time and time again with the biggest and the smallest of our customers, that they just will really, when the partnership has been built well, and you have come to the table honestly with the things that you need to pull something amazing off, everyone throws in to help that happen. And I don't think people realise that can be true in this place. It's always like, you have to fight for customers, you have to fight to get them to buy, you've got to fight to keep them. You've got to fight to make a great relationship, and you've got to work to make that relationship enduring. And if you do that work, then they will be there as a member of your team almost from the beginning. And I think that's we've been pleasantly surprised and completely fortunate for that to be true.
Look, I would say you might be surprised and you might feel fortunate, but I think you're receiving what you're putting out there. Yeah. And, you know, it is a reciprocal thing. It is a relationship that is two-way. So we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask just one last question. Sure. 2021, what's in store for you? What's the one thing that you're really excited about that for Goterra and for the company and for yourself? It's just bigger, better, stronger. And yeah, we're just going to be bigger and we're going to do better and we're going to have more strength and there's just going to be more maggots. So it won't be a bad thing. More maggots, put it on a shirt.com. Look, I love it. And I think, to be honest, anybody who is watching this video is going to be a fan and an advocate of the work that you're doing. And you personally, you're an incredibly generous leader and founder. You're an incredibly generous leader in the startup ecosystem, I would say as well. And so I just want to thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today, for sharing it with both me personally. I've gotten a lot out of it, but also the entire community of people that will be watching this. And I think you're an inspiration to many. I know the journey is not over yet. It's a long one to go, and we wish you well in 2021 and beyond, and we will be advocating for you. Thank you so much. Bye. Thanks.